We must simply tell them means the servants, that we intend to give him to the police, as indeed we must, Sadao. We must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else but to hand him over to the police. Thus agreed, together they lifted the man. He was very light, like a fall, but had been half starved for a long time until it was only feathers and skeleton. That was all that was, the skin and skeleton was left in him. So, his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. This door opened into the passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk, and the lining was pure white silk. He is so dirty, she murmured in distress, and how to use such a beautiful and a costly quilt for this man who is dirty. Yes, he had better be washed, Sadao agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. I cannot bear for you to touch him, he said. She said, we shall have to tell the servants he is here. I will tell Yomi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Sadao considered for a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yomi and I will tell the others. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. But before say they decided that they would tell the servants, Yomi and the other servants, to uh, do the needful to make the man say clean. But before that say, Sadao considered a moment, and he stooped, he bent down and felt his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. The pulse was faint, but it was there. He put his hands against the man's cold breast. The heart too was yet alive. He will die unless he is operated on, Sadao said, considering. The question is whether he will not die anyway. Say, if he is not operated, he will die. If he is operated and if he is alive, again, the question is whether he will not die anyway. Even in that way, saved as a war prisoner, and there again he was going to die. Hannah cried out in fear, don't try to save him. What if he should leave? If he is alive, then what shall we do? What if he should die? Sadao replied. He stood gazing down on the motionless man. This man must have extraordinary vitality, or he would have been dead by now. Otherwise, he would not have reached the shore. But then he was very young, perhaps not yet 25. You mean die from the operation? His wife Hannah is asking that. Do you think he will die if we operate on him? Yes, Sadao said. Hannah considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, and first he must be washed. He went quickly out of the room, and Hannah came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. He was the first she had seen since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Here he was her enemy, a menace, a threat, living or dead. That is what her attitude was towards the American men. They were all enemies for her, When she was in America, at that time she studied with them, and the people she knew she had all forgotten, and now she did not was not in touch with anyone. She turned to the nursery and called, "Yummy." But the children heard her voice, and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. Over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth, "Yomi, come with me. I will put the baby to bed." Yomi replied, "He is ready." She went with Yomi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in arms while Yomi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Then Hannah led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. Their master means Sadao had told them. The old gardener, who was also a house servant, pulled the few hairs on off his upper lip. "The master ought not to heal the wound of this white man," he said bluntly to Hannah. "The white man ought to die. First he was shot, then the sea caught him and wounded him with her rocks. If the master heals what the gun did and what the sea did, they will take revenge on us." "I will tell you what you say," Hannah replied courteously. But she herself was also frightened. Although she was not superstitious as the old man was, could it ever be well to help an enemy? That was a question that raised in her mind. Nevertheless, she told Yomi to fetch the hot water to the room where the white man was. She went ahead and slid back the partitions. Sadao was not yet there. Yumi, following, put down her wooden bucket. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. "I have never washed a white man," she said, "and I will not wash so dirty a one now." Hannah cried at her severely. "You will do what your master commands you." There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hannah felt unreasonably afraid. After all, if the servant should report something that was not as it happened, very well, she said with dignity. "You understand, we only want to bring him to his senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner." "I will have nothing to do with it," Yomi said. "I am a poor person and it's not my business." "Then please," Hannah said gently, return to your own work." At once Yomi left the room, but this left Hannah with the white man alone. She might have been too afraid to stay with not her anger at Yomi's stubbornness now sustained her. So she was angry on Yomi because Yomi did not listen to her. But, say, "Stupid Yomi," she muttered fiercely. "Is this anything but a man? And a wounded, helpless man? Why white or black? Say he is a wounded man and should be helped." In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. When she had his breast bare, she dipped the small clean towel into Yomi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of fine texture and must have been very blond when he was a child. While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean. But she dared not turn him over. There was Sadao. Where was Sadao? The question arose in her mind. Now her anger was ebbing, was getting down, and she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. The less then Lest the man be chilled. If the man is not chilled, she put the quilt over him. Sadao, she called softly. He had been out to come in. He had been about to come in when she called. His hand had been on the door and now he opened it. She saw that he had brought his surgery's emergency bag and that he wore his surgeon's coat. You have decided to operate? She cried. Yes, he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilizer towel upon the floor of the uh, tokonomo, tokonoma alcove and put his instruments out upon it. Fetch towels, he said. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towel. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights and took an armful of them. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. Oh, the mat, she cried. Yes, it is ruined, Sadao replied, as though he did not care. Help me to turn him, he commanded her. She obeyed him without a word, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. Yami would not wash him, she said. Did you did you wash him then? Sadao asked, not stopping for a moment with swift, concise movements. Yes, I did it. He did not seem to hear her. He did not listen that she had done it. But she was used to his absorption when he was at work. So when the doctor was at work, he did not listen to anything that others said. She wondered for a moment, if it meant what was the body upon what was the body upon which he worked so long, as it was for the work he did so excellently. You will have to give the anesthetist if he needs it, he said. That you will have to give him the anesthetic so that he is unconscious if at all he needs it. I, she repeated blankly, but never have I given anybody an anesthetic. It is easy enough, he said impatiently. He was talking about he was taking out the packing now, and the blood began to flow more quickly. He peered into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened on his head. You can see that in the picture. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. Now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet. But the bleeding is not superficial. It has lost he has lost much blood. At this moment Hannah choked. He looked up and saw her face the color of sulphur. Don't faint, he said sharply. He did not put down his exploring instruments. If I stop now, the man will surely die. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard the retching, but he went on with his work. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. Then she would feel comfortable because on looking at the operation and the way he was wounded, she had that vomiting sensation. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation. But her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient and irritable with this man who lay like dead under his knife. Now, say, as he could not go, she had never seen an operation, and that's why she was disturbed. Besides that, say, he could not leave this man whom he was operating, and take care of his wife. That is why he was also a little impatient and irritable with this man.